Hey, good morning, polar bears. It is Friday, September 4th. Can y'all believe it? We're already in September. That is crazy. I mean, by the time we know it, it's going to be December and another year has gone by. Hopefully, this year we can put it behind us, right? Okay, so for today, I did ask you in that first question, what are some crime shows? So it could be crime shows, it could be podcasts, it could be movies, right? All related with crime that you've seen or heard of. So on this slide, I have a couple of shows, a couple of them. Some you may have known, or some that you may know of, some that you may have never heard of. But a big one is Law and Order. I think the latest version is Special Victims Unit. I know Netflix came out with the new version of Unsolved Mysteries, Mindhunter. That's a pretty good one that kind of talks about the bringing up of like how we study serial killers. Forensic Files, y'all. I really love Forensic Files because I feel like that one really brings out how forensics can play a real role in actual cases. And CSI is a good one too. So you may recognize some of these, you may not, but believe it or not, these shows have a huge effect on how we use forensic science in the real world. So our objectives for today, we're going to compare real life forensics to TV forensics because honestly, it's not always the same. And we're going to explain what we call the CSI effect and its actual effect. Like, what is it and what does it actually do to people? So our CSI effect. CSI effect is when exaggerated forensic science and TV crime dramas influence how juries treat evidence. Okay, so let's break down this definition. Exaggerated. First off, exaggerated meaning, when if I'm talking about Mr. Hartle and I'm like, hey, Mr. Hartle's like 100 years old. Well, I'm exaggerating a little bit, right? He may not be 100 years old, but he might be a little older than me or a little older than, or a lot older than y'all. Forensic science is just is how we apply science in this case, in these cases, how we use what we learn about science and apply it to actual criminal investigations. And specifically, we'll break this down a little bit more, this part, these three words here, how these TV dramas, how they change and influence, right? How juries treat evidence. So just in case you're not very familiar with how a courtroom is run or what a jury even is, I want to break it down. So courtroom, right? This is what happens when somebody commits a crime or is accused of committing a crime and they have to go to a jury trial. So we have, I would say, three main parties. We have the prosecutor, and they're in charge of I'll start actually with the defendant. We'll start with the defendant. They're the person that's accused of a crime. They're the person that potentially committed the crime. Then we'll go to the prosecutor. The prosecutor in this case is standing up, and he or she is basically in charge of providing evidence or reasons, right, for why this person actually did commit the crime. And last but not least, the jury. The jury are just they don't play a role in this. They basically decide, well, is the prosecutor correct? They basically decide if the defendant is guilty or not guilty. That's their role. And they're usually just random citizens that get picked out. And the key thing here is the evidence. The evidence is that the gun that's needed in order to find out for the shooting, or it's a piece of hair that proves that this person was there and ended up robbing a bank or something. So it's what actually convicts, what actually makes these defendants or convinces the jury, these people, that the defendant is guilty. So with most things on TV, TV is a little exaggerated. With anything, I mean anything. So if you're really good at something, if you're really good at, let's say, drawing, or if you're really good at piano, if you ever watch TV about the one thing you're good at, you'll notice that a lot of the times they don't get a lot of things right. So my example here is just throwing a football. Here's an example of a person on TV throwing a football. If you don't know anything about football, you might be like, oh, that looks okay, normal. Let's look at the person on the right. This is an actual college football player throwing a football. Looks a little different when you actually know how to do it. So, trials on TV versus real life. First, we're going to focus on the trials on TV. Or on TV, so shows typically run between 30 minutes to 1 hour, right? This can be Netflix shows, this can be shows on Hulu, this could be shows on Disney Plus. But specifically, crime shows tend to run between 30 minutes and 1 hour. In these crime shows, the evidence is very clear and perfect. So they find the right gun at the right time, they find the right piece of hair, they find the right fingerprint. And it just makes everything so easy. Literally, sometimes you'll see them put a piece of hair into like a machine, and then the machine will compute some results and be like, well, John was guilty. And it's very clear cut. Also, something that some of these TV shows do is that the evidence is really fast. It's always, again, these tests take about 20 minutes, and it's always done super fast. And again, it leads directly to the bad person. However, trials and crime shows in real life, they're a lot different. So a forensics lab test is usually very slow, and that's very important. That's very important to know. It can usually take about between 24 to 72 hours in order to get a lab test done. But specifically, it usually also just gets delayed. So it could last longer than that. Forensics in real life is not always appropriate for every case, right? You can't just go ahead and apply forensics in any case a lawyer gets. And honestly, for forensics labs, there are always limited resources, meaning, some of these police departments, while they have a big budget, they might not use all that budget or much of that budget for forensics labs. So again, imagine you're in school, right? And there's not a whole lot of money for books. Guess what? You're not going to have a lot of books. You can't reference those books. That's very similar to the forensics labs. There's not a lot of money towards the forensics labs. You can't have this equipment that makes you and helps you provide these lab tests. So something that's done a lot, or at least I've seen a lot on either movies, again, crime movies, or even crime shows, is facial reconstruction. Now, I'm not saying that facial reconstruction is fake or that it can't be done, but the way some shows show it is that they print out the exact person. It looks just like them. And that's not necessarily how real forensics runs. It might be a rough outline, or you might be able to tell if the person's of a certain race or ethnicity. So again, it's very hard to come up with all these features and get the person perfect. Photo enhancement. This is a big one. So believe it or not, and this is just a gif of how you can zoom in on a photo, and usually you'll see a scene in a movie, and it's like zoom in right there, and it's the smallest part of the photo, and it just zooms in like 20 times. In real life, you usually, if you do that, you'll probably just see a block of color. You won't see anything. You won't be able to tell what it is. And on TV, if you've seen these shows, you'll notice that these scientists are usually, they're out in the field, they're collecting this evidence, they're right at the scene of the crime, and then they're like back in the lab doing tests, and then they go back out in the field and they're trying to catch the bad person. So they're doing both sides. They're basically like a cop and a scientist at the same time. But that doesn't always happen, right? A cop might be and we'll break this down more once we get into crime scene investigation specifically, but a cop's the first one on the scene. A forensic scientist might collect some evidence. So they might come and take photos. They might pick up some important pieces of material, and they might just be in the lab the rest of the time. So they don't get, the fast life of trying to catch the criminal on the street. So how does this affect the courtroom? Well, imagine if you watch all these shows, you take in all this media, right? And you think, well, I saw this person on TV, the forensic scientist on TV solved the crime within 30 minutes and had all the perfect crime. all the perfect evidence they needed. And guess what? They put the bad guy away. Well, if you bring that back to a real courtroom and you're a jury and you've seen these shows, well, guess what? If a lawyer brings up some evidence that might not be as clear and cut, they might think like your case is not as strong. They might think like, you know what, you really don't know what you're doing, and you don't really have enough evidence to prosecute this defendant. So again, it can change people's minds. It can mess with people's minds and think, well, you know, you don't have as big of as evidence as the ones that are as the forensic scientists I see on TV. So you probably don't know what you're doing, which is not always the case. So I do want to show you at least one clip. And this person here, right, he actually is a forensic scientist and has done it. And so he's breaking down a lot of these shows and movies that have these scenes. So we'll watch one of these.
NCIS personal protective equipment.
No, rule number 2 is always wear gloves, but when there's this much blood...
Rain gear. In the truck.
So in this scene, they actually...
So before he talks, I just want to point out that he's going to bring up a lot of the equipment, you know, equipment you might use in different science labs or you might use later on in science labs.
Talk about wearing personal protective equipment.
Rain gear.
Yet no one is wearing any sort of garb.
What happened?
Everyone is wearing just like a jumpsuit or their regular attire and just gloves. Basically, you would never want to do that.
Well, apparently that one did.
Beyond that, our crime scene technician, he's taking photographs. He then wipes his brow. Then he handles evidence. Basically what he's done, he's taken DNA that was on that camera, on his brow, and put it onto our evidence on the scene. And then proceeds to have a whole conversation while holding that evidence right by his face.
Did you see The Counselor? That was a pretty good movie.
Again, improper procedure for collection of DNA evidence. He could have been wearing a Tyvek suit, a mask. You may even want to wear goggles or...
See, and this is real key. We'll kind of break down what actual forensic or criminal scene investigators actually use. You'll see these suits. You'll see that they're actually covering their feet in their shoes. They have gloves on. They have a mask, and it's all very tidy, right? In every or in most scenes in TV shows and movies, it's not going to be like that, and that's a problem. So again, we'll break down
and multiple layers of gloves.
Rule number 2 is always wear gloves.
Oh,
sweet. And we'll break this down more as we get further into the year, further into forensic science. We'll learn more about, well, what do we need to do whenever a crime occurs? Like what happens on the scene? I know later on we'll also cover some forensic science photography or some crime scene photography specifically, and it'll be pretty fun. Well, let me know if you have any questions, y'all. That's it. CSI Effect. It's very important. It's before we even jump into anything else, it's very much an important part of forensic science. See you guys. Let me know if you have any questions.